Okay, good morning. Let me try that again. Good morning. All right. Now we're ready. So it's great to see everybody here in person. It's been a long time since we've been able to host an event like this. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And a few weeks ago, some of you know that we had a webinar on this subject and related topics. And today we have the pleasure of doing a continuation of that in person. We had speakers at the webinar from all over the world to discuss the future of our industries, how they intersect with Web3's permissionless, decentralized nature. We heard voices from industries, groups, and government agencies from all over the world, including the UN, the World Bank, and several tech-focused NGOs. All spoke on the bright future that Web3 will support. Today's summit can be seen as a continuation of those discussions. A quick overview. The first block of events will include a Web3 and the Metaverse discussion, the future of global competitiveness, and of course, the US' own economic competitiveness. We'll go on to cover discussions on DeFi and regulatory space enforcement. And then we'll have our keynote speech from CFTC's Commissioner Summer Mersinger, which segs us into lunch. Is anybody listening? That's the full program for the day, right? I wanted to see if anybody panicked that we were going to try to do all that by lunchtime. So that's the program for the day. Our final block will have us looking forward to the new era of finance in the wake of the web. Before I hand things off, I'd like to extend a sincere thank you first to our sponsors, our founding partner, Circle, our partner, Steptone and Johnson, and our friends, Evertas and the Electric Coin Company. The Academy would like to thank our co-host, GBBC, the Global Blockchain Business Council, for their hard work in putting this together, with a special heartfelt thanks from all of us at the Academy to Sandra Rowe, who really did an amazing, awesome job in putting all this together. So I will now pass the mic to our first panelist.
I think you turned it off. No.
Okay, is that working? Okay, perfect. It's great to see everyone, great to have everyone here. We are maybe missing one of our panelists, but we'll do our best to continue. I'm Morgan Brubaker. I'm a partner at Latham & Watkins. We're a global law firm. I do a lot of work in the Web3 and digital assets space. And I'm the least important person up here today, but I'm going to attempt to facilitate sort of a conversation around the metaverse and Web3 with Bill Hughes. He's the senior counsel and director of global regulatory matters at Consensus, which I'm sure you all know is one of the leading Ethereum blockchain software companies. Bill joined Consensus after serving as an associate deputy attorney general at the Department of Justice, where he managed the department's work on a broad spectrum of prospective regulations, also working closely with the White House and the DOJ with respect to its regulatory and policy initiatives in response to COVID-19 related fraud and money laundering. Very impressive. And one of Bill's primary focuses at Consensus is the legal and regulatory and public policy issues surrounding the crypto ecosystem. So really excited to sort of hear what you've been thinking around that. Jeff Malik is our second panelist. He is a community champion and strategic partner at Algorand, which is an open source payment-focused blockchain network aiming at resolving the issue of scalability, just a small, problem. And he's also one of the co-founders at Startup Boost, which is a 30,000 plus member community, bridging the gap from Web 2 to Web 3 by accelerating startup success across fundraising, PR, digital marketing, and sales enablement. I guess, something that I think maybe to start us off is, to both of you, what is the metaverse, right? I mean, I feel like this term gets thrown around a lot, right? We have Web3, the metaverse, crypto, what are sort of to you the distinguishing characteristics of the metaverse, and how will we know when we're in the metaverse, or are we in the metaverse currently?
I hope everybody can hear me. So I think that the distinction between, our digital identities, our digital realities currently would be, this perception of ownership and verification. I think that shift and having it verifiable on-chain, I think that's one of the distinctions I see in the future, quote-unquote, metaverse. So, I think that it's just, the mental comprehension for people who grew up in a certain time and space where, they had to wait 10 seconds to get online with AOL or whatever else, and now this whole entire new IP and Bored Apes and the new Disney and whatever else is coming along in the future. I guess that shift of ownership, I think that's the distinction I see in the future metaverse, as they would call it.
I first want to say it's great to be at AU Law School. I actually grew up not too far from here, back before I even think there was an AU Law School. I don't want to date myself, but when it was first created, it was in a completely separate building, which used to be a movie theater. And then I guess they moved here while I wasn't looking. But I love the energy in a law school. Y'all don't study enough. Enjoy it while you can, because you don't get to choose what you take and what you learn later in life. Just like youth, legal educations are wasted on law students. So maybe that's more of a self-criticism than anything else. But with respect to the metaverse, the way I've conceptualized it is it's basically a completely online economy. The internet is, as Web 2, the internet is basically information only. You share content, you consume content, you provide content. It's all informational, essentially. And it takes different, it's not just writing, obviously, it takes different forms, but to the extent there's any economic nexus, that economy is external to the internet. It exists in parallel. The metaverse blends the two, where that informational interplay among various participants or users of the internet is tied inextricably to economic activity. And that's because blockchains allow us to have digital scarcity when it didn't used to exist. And so, well, what does that look like? That's what's being experimented with now. I think you're going to see it manifest itself in culture more than anything else, where 20 years ago, the idea that somebody's Instagram profile or Facebook page was something they sort of emotionally connect with as reflecting who they are. I think that's just going to be amplified as we go forward, and people are going to have very close affiliations with their online self. That doesn't mean that necessarily they're going to be someone different, or necessarily that they're going to be the same person in the digital space. But when they think of themselves as persons, they're what they do, their activity, both cultural and economic, online will be much more inextricably connected to who they are in their own minds, I think. And that's going to affect how people collaborate in the communities that are created, and the fact that there's this great frontier about what people can do who don't really know each other or otherwise have most things in common. Maybe they just have this one thing. The fact that this space will allow them across borders to collaborate and to combine efforts and sort of synthesize interests in ways that they haven't ever done before. Those are some of the characteristics I think about when I think about the metaverse.
Thanks, and welcome, Katrina. I'm so glad that you're here because I'm really interested, and just to sort of round out the introductions, Katrina Wang currently heads the ecosystem and conference at Penn Blockchain, was the first investment principal at HiveMind Capital, which is a $1 billion plus venture capital firm based in New York. And I think what's really relevant to this topic is, your publication, A Systemic Dissection of the Metaverse. And I believe you also recently hosted Wharton's first Metaverse Industry Talk panel. So I guess sort of the topic here is what is the Metaverse? What are sort of, how do we distinguish the Metaverse from other sort of concepts in the blockchain and sort of digital realm, and sort of, so I would love your sort of thoughts on what is the metaverse, what are its characteristics, and are we in the metaverse now? When will we know when we're in the metaverse?
Thank you, Morgan. Thanks for the kind intro. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, first of all, apologize. I had some issue finding the room, but glad I made it. Again, my name's Katrina. So my history with Metaverse really started last September, actually right before Facebook changed its name to Meta, which really bring Metaverse to the center stage. So even though this meteoric rise of the Metaverse only came about last year, the concept's actually been around since 1992. The term was actually initially coined by Neil Stephenson's novel, Snow Crash. And that was sort of the initial concept. And let's think about exactly what it means. And before answering that question, first, I kind of want to ask ourselves why it matters, right? So let's market size this metaverse, because ultimately we want to drive the next phase of economic growth. And as I dug into my research initially, different sources really have different ways of market sizing. It ranged from the 1 trillion by PR Newswire to 8 to 13 trillion from a Citi report, where they basically count half of the future US economy to be metaverse related. And what's causing such distinction? And that really depends on how we're really defining the metaverse. So to me, it's the ultimate convergence between the physical and digital world. And if you search online, there will be different schools of thoughts of the different vision you have around metaverse. But there are 5 defining features that I think is really helpful, at least help me with my research to orient what exactly it means. The first one is persistent. A true metaverse should never pause or reset. When you go away from Fortnite, for example, now you have to log back in and start over. But essentially, in the true metaverse, you have this continuity of time and activities. Number 2 is interoperable. I want to be able to take my identity, my asset, from one meta galaxy to another, right? From one platform to the other, whatever this platform is, without having my data logged in to this walled garden. Number 3 is concurrent. So when you play Fortnite now, you're constrained by the server limitation, and you can essentially, the server can only fit up to 200 concurrent players in the same session. What this means is if I want to play with hundreds of other players in the true world, like we cannot really communicate or send concurrent information to another because of the hardware limitation. And in a true metaverse, it should be completely concurrent and simultaneous. Number 4, it's user generated. We will generate our own content in the metaverse and persist that way. And the last one is decentralized. And I want to emphasize the point of decentralized because this is one of the hot topic debated by many of, are we going to have an open metaverse? Are we going to have, someone like Meta, like one day dominate the metaverse? That's why also I think crypto economy will be inextricably linked to the metaverse economy because fundamentally that will enable an open metaverse in the primitive by decentralizing ownership, decentralizing data. So just to repeat the 5 defining features out of the research, it is persistent, interoperable, concurrent, user-generated, and decentralized. So yeah, those are the 5 keywords I wanted to take away sort of from this little intro.
Awesome, thanks so much. I think that that's really a good way of sort of thinking through the different sort of, what are the sort of aspects, those 5 aspects that make up the metaverse, right? And I think one of the things that you hit on, and I know that you're sort of especially interested in, is the infrastructure to this, right? The hardware. Is that, I would say, where do you see us sort of in our trajectory towards this metaverse? And is hardware, or sort of what else do you see as sort of one of the main challenges of us getting there?
That's a great question. This is work. Okay, great. Hardware and software. I think in the past 10 years, we've focused a lot on the software innovation with different platforms, and we have the big tech meteoric rise over the past decade. But going forward, to really achieve the vision of metaverse, hardware, I would say, even can be called more important than software, especially with regards to computer-human interface. So Morgan, to your earlier question, are we in the metaverse now? In one sense, maybe. We have Roblox, we have decentralized. Those are a virtual world in which we could live in. But what's a true metaverse is, for example, when we take the Zoom meeting, can we hologram someone in? Can we put on a haptic and actually touch and feel and actually have real-sized human being avatar sitting in front of us? And what does that depend on? That's hardware. And in a way, Apple is actually in the best position to do a metaverse if they do want to do the endeavor, because everyone uses iPhone and EarPod, and all of that is a gateway or even a gatekeeper of a true metaversal experience. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's a good point. I mean, do you see, we talk about decentralized. Do you see that there are, in the hardware space, that there are going to be just a few players in this, that, or at least at first, that are sort of going to sort of spawn this new era? Or, do you see sort of a broader, because interoperability is another one that you said. How do we get to that? Or do you see sort of there being interoperability only between a few sort of different hardware sort of, things to get us into the metaverse, if you will?
Yeah, I'll parse the 2 questions to first crypto economy and how it's linked. And then second, another aspect of how many metaverse will there be. On the crypto side, again, touch upon the point of infrastructure. The reason why we have a lot of L1s, those are the foundational sort of L1 chains versus L2, because those are fundamentally enabling technology to allow you to bridge from one ecosystem to another, depending on where or which ecosystem or L1 your digital asset sits on top of. And hence, you hear all of these talk around bridging and come with bridging. It's like hacks, and how can we safely transfer these digital assets from one universe to the other? And on top of these L1s, we can build our metaverse, can build the front end rendering and all that. So if we look at the tech stack, and not holistically, but what's relevant here is we have the L1s and we have sort of the adoption-focused front-end customer-facing world or decentralized apps built on top of it, and that will, essentially create a new phase of decentralized metaverse. So that's the answer to your first question. And regarding how many metaverse will there be, and that's a great question. So one of the pioneer in the space, Outlier Venture, they keep insisting this concept of open metaverse. And there's a quote I'll use from Tim Sweeney. If somehow one entity have the control over metaverse, this entity will be more powerful than any state or government in the world. Because, for example, physics, we take physics for granted. We're grounded to this, face of the earth. But in metaverse, we can rewrite the law of atoms. Well, gravity works. What are the policies and laws, which I'm sure you will touch upon later in the discussion? Who will get to write these? So I would propose, and I will be an advocate for open metaverse and a decentralized world, and there should be just one metaverse where it's jointly owned by every single participant in there.
So speaking just briefly about infrastructure, this is a software world we're going to be walking into. I mean, we're already part of a software world to a large extent, but probably the third most significant event in the short history of crypto is upon us with the merge of the Ethereum beacon chain with Ethereum mainnet, just transitioning proof of work to proof of stake. Just yesterday, I was in an event with one of the developers who's been working on the merge for years and years and years. And I asked him, like, and so the importance of the merge is that it not only moves to proof of stake, which is, let's say, much more energy efficient, it also has some security benefits for the chain, making it more secure. But it's also the foundation on which a lot of new scaling tech can be built. And so this scaling will be roll-ups and L2s and whatnot. But when I explored with him, like, what do you think of like a timeline for this? And he, I wouldn't say reluctantly, but a little, a little sheepishly said, we're building this for the long haul. We think if, Ethereum can be the world computer that everyone relies on, for 100 years. And so we're going to take our time and we're going to do it right. And a lot of stuff we have to figure out. We haven't figured it out yet. He goes, so this is like decades of work to really get to the place where you're doing transaction throughput like a centralized, optimized system can do. And that's just like a guess. So I don't know if that's too much, too little, and what a system like that can do with respect to creating whatever you conceptualize as the metaverse. But we're on a long road here. And what's heartening is that there are a lot of people exploring in a lot of different directions. And I think that from that, you get actually productive growth. In fits and starts, some things will look smart, a lot of stuff will look stupid. But without all of that directed chaos, you're never going to get something truly innovative and productive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Jeff, I'm also interested on your thoughts. That, you do a lot of things around scalability and things like that. What are your thoughts on how this is all going to sort of pan out?
Particularly, I was thinking about something like Brave and Bat. There's a browser. If you look at the Web2 version of Google Chrome, it's like, are we really building a better product than Web3? Not necessarily. There's fantastic products in Web2. It's just a question of that shift in ownership. And, your data, your ownership of your data. So they're gating it where, hey, we're going to anonymize your data, but we're going to give you a token as a reward to allow us to use that data and promote things to you that you would actually want to see. So it's a different ownership structure. I think that's the key to these products in Web3, why they're going to be adopted en masse, because...
Would you agree that like there really needs to be, it starts with like a desirable user experience, and then once you start using, you go, oh wow, it has all these other things which I didn't realize I liked a lot. Because I'm not seeing a feature set that is getting over let's say a challenging user experience. And like you get an adoption, but what you really get is once things improve to a point where it's what people want to use, and then all of the other features that are part and parcel and core to the new experience sort of manifest themselves and become like clearly the better option.
The first problem, the first layer is that the onboarding experience is not efficient. It's not fantastic. The user experience on Web3 is, we're all early adopters, so it's just not there yet. And that has to do something with, you know, the existing L1s and the first mover advantage they have of being, I would say, inefficient. You're not actually finalizing a transaction on chain for 30 seconds or 6 minutes or whatever it is. So yeah, there's a whole entire conversation on that layer. So I would say that the first problem is, for user adoption, is the technology was not aligning with, I guess, the promises. So there's kind of a hump we have to get over in those terms.
And I guess, you know, when we talk about sort of a shift of ownership, I think there's two sort of big things that I'd like to hit on here that I think are important. But the first, I guess, would be who's going to control the metaverse? Is it individuals? Is it, I mean, we talked earlier before this about DAOs. How do you see, you know, sort of from a policy perspective, the metaverse being controlled, and how is that sort of working right now?
I'm a little uncomfortable with the framing of saying the metaverse is controlled. I think
You're
to the
right.
extent
You're
the
right.
metaverse, it'll be controlled by a set of rules, which will
right.
be the protocol.
Right.
That's the beauty of any of these blockchain systems, is that they are rules-based systems. My quibble is with people who want to superimpose additional rules, social construct rules, that don't otherwise attend to the system by its structure. We can get into that if we want to. But I think to the extent it is governed, is separate and apart from any protocol rules attendant to the particular blockchains or software, you will have different communities with different standards that operate in the most efficient and effective way based on what that community is set up to do or to stand for or to decide. And I say most efficient and effective way because right now communities are just sort of experimenting with how to operate, where their decision making and some of the actions they're taking are on-chain things, meaning that you have a vote to execute a transaction for a certain purpose. Precisely how, and so this is where sort of decentralized, autonomous organizations, DAOs, start to come into the conversation. Essentially, they're just groups of people who have decided to collaborate and act collectively to make decisions, and those decisions really translate into on-chain transactions, which are basically adjusting the ledger, sending tokens to here or there or whatever, signing messages cryptographically. In terms of how those communities are run, there's let's say, a lot of experimentation in that regard. And I think to an earlier point, because where the tech is limited in terms of its speed, smart contracts are still pretty primitive in terms of how the sophistication of the transactions they can perform. All of that is fully expected to be built upon, but because of those current limitations, what a DAO can do that is actually automated on-chain without people in the real world having to make decisions or implement decisions of like online voting, that's actually pretty limited. And so, I mean, the critics are right, but not correct when they say DAOs aren't really decentralized, and really it's just a handful of people who have, you know, the control over a multi-sig, which is actually effectuating what a DAO has decided to do or not. they're right in that criticism about the current state of it, but the critics tend to ignore sort of the natural arc of these things getting better and incorrectly presume that this is what you get. And so I think there's some primitives in terms of like on-chain governance, which are being worked through. The last thing I will say is, to what extent will this digital realm be influenced by real-world jurisdictional rules like laws, regulations, whatnot? And this may be too harsh. I think a lot of people have been, who comment on this stuff, have been doing so from a position where they sort of ignore the undeniable reality that people who will be participating in the digital world will not still be beholden to the jurisdictional rules of where they live. There's like this meme of this perfectly nomadic anon who just sort of drifts around sort of completely anonymously in the real world and exists purely in the digital world. That maybe in some sort of Mad Max future, that's true. But the way this impacts is that if you're a community and some of your members are in the United States, or you're a United States-based DAO, and you have members from all over, there are going to be rules which dictate transactions they can and cannot be a part of. And the question is, well, how much do those rules really implicate that type of activity they're conducting? And so the complexity there is going to just continue to grow. We've seen it recently in questions about like Tornado Cash and the sanctions, like, do Americans transacting and participating in this early iteration of Web3 or the metaverse, like how do these rules impact their online behavior? Does it impact? Should it? And so in terms of how these things are governed, like I would dispense with any notion that traditional jurisdictional-based rules, regs, and laws are not going to influence how this thing is structured or how people participate in it. Sorry for the long monologue.
Yeah, and to your point, there is actually ways now that they're creating on-chain where you can KYC, have an anonymous wallet, but in case something happens, you're able to claim it through zero-knowledge proofs, reclaim your wallet and your keys. So there's that kind of distinction between privacy and decentralization, but I think there's going to be ways to bridge the gap in the future, but it's just, we're very early. So in terms of something like, even like Banksy, he went to, argue about some IP or some sort of piece of art, and he lost in the court of law because, to a degree, is anonymity. So there is this idea of like this fractionalized ownership, these random wallets, owning a piece of a smart contract that has, let's say the Doodles just raised $50 million, $700 million valuation. If a random address owns a percentage of that, how can they claim an airdrop? They would have to KYC. So there's a degree of, if you want to maintain your anonymity, you're going to lose out on some sort of value as well. So
yeah, it's just going to all be trade-offs. And no one really can enumerate those trade-offs right now, nor come up with like how they're going to shake out. There's so much to not know, which makes it a pretty cool place to play in. If you're into policy and you're into sort of exploring unprobed frontiers.
Yeah, and to quickly add on to the DAO point, now we see all the startups in the form of DAOs, but to me in the future, it would just be an underlying framework. It should be one of the foundational layers as we build up the metaverse. It's too late when we already have Apple or Meta dominating, producing all the product. Then we think about, how can we insert the power of community into these big tech's realm? No, that is too late. As we start thinking about building the metaverse, we should already embed DAO framework. Are we allowing everyone to vote? What's the weight of the voting? Are we doing quadratic voting or retroactive voting? All of that needs to be part of the design thinking rather than after the fact. So just want to quickly point that out as we think about the policy making here.
Could I ask one question of Jeff? Not to take over, it's not my role. But just about Meta or Apple or sort of this like centralized metaverse, which is an oxymoron. Do you get a sense that blockchain community, ecosystem, crypto ecosystem has any sort of palette for like a meta-created metaverse? I get the sense that it's maybe there's less aversion in the regular, normal public sphere than in this very idiosyncratic crypto universe that we occupy, but I would just think there's a general aversion to like this centralized and manufactured experience. And even if there wasn't that aversion, I don't see how a centralized, even a very smart, well-staffed, well-funded enterprise could possibly compete with the multiplicity of a permissionless system where anybody can create anything and participate directly and benefit directly from their own creation. I don't think the two systems could even possibly be in the same category.
I think you're going to see an inverse where you're going to have this natural organic IPs, like let's say Bored Apes didn't exist last year. They're worth X amount of $1 billion now. You're going to see where the Web3 natives, which they can't compete with, are going to create some sort of fantastic IP, and they're going to pull talent from Web2 as opposed to the other way around. And that's going to be the way that they claim ownership over the space. And I don't think anybody could stop it, honestly.
And what do you see as sort of then the role for someone like Meta? I mean, are they part of the infrastructure? How does that sort of evolve? Because I think it's really interesting because there is a dichotomy there, right? Because one is a centralized, big platform-based sort of system, and one of the 5 tenets that you talked about in the beginning was this decentralized. There's not one owner. You know, we talked about like no one who controls, governs the metaverse. Those are sort of, not quite compatible. So what's the future of
I just want to touch on one
maybe?
subject
Yeah.
particularly about, I guess, the status of work and their contributions, because the way things work a lot of times, like you're in a Discord or a Twitter or whatever, and somebody's chatting and somebody can say, hey, like I have some sort of piece of code I want to contribute. Now, what I think it's going to shift to is because this comes in like microtransactions where, okay, you have this whole entire program and I'm just going to add something on top of it. It's like you're going to have this anonymized wallet, but it's KYC'd, and you're going to be able to verify that on chain. So you might be contributed to somebody with a Discord handle, Bob123, but he has a KYC'd but private wallet. So it's kind of going to be that bridging the gap where like you can trust the person, but you don't know their identity per se, but you know that they are somebody because there's some sort of a product that confirms that on chain. You just have that, that privacy layer, which is, I think that's you haven't seen the shift yet. We're a little bit early to see it, but I'm seeing the people building the products. I think that's where it's going to go.
I think a charitable answer to your question about where does Meta fit in, perhaps, no one knows. Perhaps they're sort of like an AOL, which is this massive onboarding mechanism which makes this new space very accessible, very safe, and not only onboards people, gets them more familiar with whatever it is, but also gives the actual true space time to mature and then supplant it. So Facebook, something I was talking with colleagues, and the question was, how many people are on Instagram? How many Instagram accounts are there? Does anyone have any idea? It's like 1.5 billion people, or it's 1.5, 1.9. Anyway, it's a stupid high amount. It's like unbelievably high. And having those folks cut their teeth on something branded metaverse, which is kind of metaverse-y, whatever. There's NFTs on there. There's avatars. There's spaces that you can go, which are persistent. Gets people used to that, maybe, and sort of tests the market to see what people want to use it for and want to get out of it. And then everyone's going to be watching that. And so this truly innovative space, which can go out in a million different directions and do a million different things and really experiment and find something new, they can learn from it and actually build a robust system, which will inevitably be better because you can't compete with like infinite number of people creating using infinite amounts of money. Like Meta can't compete with that.
We're seeing that with Reddit as well. They airdropped a bunch of NFTs recently. So I think it's just, again, dipping people's toes into the water for the first time, getting them comfortable, and the real innovation is yet to come.
Yeah, so like maybe Meta's AOL. AOL for the internet was huge. But unless you're emailing your grandkids, you don't use AOL anymore.
I know one person who has an AOL email.
Yeah, I still, maybe we could like have I'd love the dial-up sound, you know, just for good time's sake.
You want some nostalgia. Some of the folks in this room probably don't even know what that sounds like.
Yeah,
but
probably.
you want some nostalgia, just play that once. You'll either get PTSD or this big wave of nostalgia.
For me, it was, you know, we had one of those second lines, you know, so that you could have
Oh yeah, and your brother or
dedicated
sister
internet.
would pick it
Oh,
up
yeah,
and it would
oh,
knock
yeah.
you off.
Oh
It
yeah,
was
yep.
horrible.
Yep, or you get caught at 11 p.m. on
The same folks saying that the metaverse and crypto is garbage would be years ago the same people say this internet's stupid. You pick up the phone, you get kicked off. This is useless. Paul Krugman's and their fax machines.
Well, I'm cognizant that I think we're about at time, but I just want to say thank you so much. I mean, I think we could talk for hours and days probably on this topic, but I think sort of, at least for me, I have sort of a better understanding of how people are thinking about what the metaverse is, sort of where we are now, what the future might look like, and sort of, what are the things that is going to take us to get there. So thank you all so much for your time and for your contributions, and we really, really appreciate it. So thanks.
You're welcome.